The U.S. midterm elections have been increasingly close. First looked to be a Republican blowout. Then Democrats took the lead. Now Republicans seem with more in striking distance of taking back the House and the Senate. And so today I'm going to tell you what happens if Republicans win the midterms, if Republicans gain back control of the House, of the Senate, what you should expect and what you should prepare for. And the first thing I would say is, don't assume you'll be partying if you're a Republican just because the Republicans win. One thing that I saw mentioned was, guess who will be blamed when the economy gets worse? If Republicans are in power in Congress, Congress has a very, very low reputation. It's a very low approval rating. And so perhaps presidents can float above whatever it is that happens because people know who the president is. They maybe have some affinity for the president. It's a person. But Congress, they're not such big fans. And so if you see a recession in 2023, which is what a lot of folks are suggesting, Republicans having some kind of hands on the levers of power might not be that well positioned if they are there. I'm certainly no Trump apologist, but you look at within like a couple of days, if I recall correctly, of COVID, it was like, hey, why is everybody losing their jobs? Look at this guy. He doesn't know how to run the country. And you can say that there's things that he did that you don't agree with, but it does seem like it was, rather unfairly assigned, as in you've got a pandemic that happened, people at hotels couldn't work. In many cases, those decisions were made at the state level, what have you. So not trying to get too much into the politics of that. But the point is, if you guys are in power and something bad happens, you're going to get blamed. And a lot of people predicting something bad happening. And so I'm Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help high net worth individuals from around the world for the last decade to legally reduce their taxes, increase their freedom with dual citizenship, and grow their opportunities overseas. All of it's legal. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And so my philosophy on this is, number one, I wouldn't be partying just because my party won. Now, if the Republicans aren't your party, then I wouldn't be partying for the same reasons. My idea is, if you're planning on your politicians changing your country for the better and changing your opportunities, especially if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're an investor, then you're in for a rude awakening. And so I look back at all the elections I followed over the last 25 years of my life. I was pretty actively watching what was happening in elections since about 1996. Every election is the most important of our lifetime. Every election will decide the fate and the soul of the country. And you just realize this is just like, this is politics 101. Washington is like Hollywood for less attractive people. It's what they do. They've got to drum up interest the same way Hollywood has to drum up interest in their latest movie, their latest TV show, what have you. Politicians make you think like you've got to be in the game for this election or it's all going to be over. And yet, what have they done for your business? Your country, the United States, is less economically competitive in the world. In my lifetime, it has fewer freedoms. Your ranking in things like freedom of the press has gone dramatically down. Freedom of speech is down. And so if you're a Democrat, okay, I guess you're going to get higher taxes. You may have some veneer of higher freedoms. You may have some, social liberties reinstated. But generally speaking, Republicans getting into power is not going to save you any money or help your business in any way. What I always say is, look at the Trump tax cuts, 39.6 to 37%. Look at the Bush tax cuts, 39.6 to 35%. What I always say, people are moving from California to Arizona. They're moving from New Mexico to Florida. They're moving from, California to Idaho. For what? You're going through all that hassle to save a little bitty state tax. And so if you want lower taxes and you believe your business will thrive, if you really believe in lower taxes, then you ought to want to move somewhere else. Republicans winning and getting into power, and by the way, with Joe Biden as president, will not be able just to pass whatever they want. And so they're going to have to really wrap a lot of stuff that Joe Biden would like around some kind of thing that you would like as a Republican for them to get anything through. The best case is, okay, we can just obstruct whatever he wants to do. And perhaps, sure, basically having the legislature be toothless could be a benefit. Isn't that a pretty cynical view on a country? It used to be, if I talk to my grandmother, for example, there was the idea that politicians came together, and I don't necessarily agree with this. I think the less the government does, the better. But there was this view that even if you were more laissez-faire, hey, the government gets together, Republicans and Democrats, and they do things that are good for all of us, and hey, Not everything is good for me individually, like, back in my grandmother's time, oh, they're going to raise taxes. But you know what? We're more prosperous than ever, at least for now, until the tax hikes kick in. And so, hey, what's the big deal? That's gone now. Everybody's at each other's throats in the United States. And I think in a large part of the Western world, I mean, the two sides think each other is evil. And so you put the Republicans in, Joe Biden's going to continue to fight them tooth and nail. They're not going to last forever, or they'll get blamed for something. If you get a Republican president, you'll have 2 years to get some stuff done. This just seems to me to be like a broken system where you're always jockeying for, like, can we get like, a year and a half before the next midterm elections to, like, if we get this in place and then this guy wins later and then we'll have like a year and a half, but then, like, really it's only a year because the election, the campaign cycle starts. Isn't it just easier to figure out what it is you want? Let's say you're a Republican. Why are you a Republican? All right, if you want gun rights, then fine. You're in the country that probably has some of the best gun rights in the world. There are other countries in Latin America and Eastern Europe that have gun rights. But the United States certainly leads on that. So if that's why you're a Republican, then I probably can't help you. If you're looking at, hey, I want to be left alone, I can promise you there are other places, not because of the government, but because of the culture. Again, some of the aforementioned places, Latin America, Eastern Europe, could be two examples. People just want to be left alone. And in some cases, they've seen what happens when the government doesn't leave them alone. And so you'll hear stories about immigrants from those parts of the world coming to the United States and saying, why are you guys doing what you're doing? You're taking it down the wrong direction. We've seen this story before in my country, they'll say. You have the taxi driver. You have any number of people who you'll meet from, again, Eastern Europe and Latin America in many cases, and they'll say, you guys are screwing yourself. And so that's the way the culture is going. There are other cultures, you can already find the freedoms you want. Whatever it is you want to do or don't want to do, there's probably a place that values it more than the United States. And if your goal is to be financial, if your goal is, I run a business, take less of my money, I'm tired of working hard, then why aren't you looking at how to move your business offshore? Americans, even though they're subject to taxation on their worldwide income, can use things like the foreign earned income exclusion. If you're a business owner and you have an active business that is not just you, but is an actual company, you can dramatically reduce your taxes by incorporating that offshore and doing the work offshore. And so, listen, it might not be a bad idea just to hedge your bets, just to diversify, just to reduce costs going into potentially a recessionary environment. Hire some folks overseas, see how it works. Move some of that staff, or if you're going to hire more people, hire those folks somewhere else. And you'll be building the first building block of an international business that could eventually be moved overseas. If you're willing to move somewhere else, and if you're looking at saying, hey, I'm tired of the Democrats have ruined my state. By the way, I lived in Arizona for over a decade. They voted to double taxes on anyone making $250,000 a couple years ago. So the quote-unquote red states really aren't that red anymore. Those folks really aren't on your side. They're not getting you the results. So being from a red state is no protection. They doubled your income tax in Arizona. And yet if you're thinking of moving out of one of the blue states to one of the red states, again, how long is that state going to be red? Because everyone else is moving in from California and Massachusetts and all those places, and eventually it will become harder and harder. As people tell me, there'll be nowhere else to run. People tell me, oh, you're going to other countries? You think you're going to run? You know where there's nowhere to run? There's nowhere to run in Florida or Texas. Look at Georgia, thoroughly blue state now. That's what's going to eventually happen to the rest of the states, just the way the country's going. And so you'll have nowhere to run. So if you can move from Massachusetts to Florida, you can move from Massachusetts to Ireland. And heck, while you're moving to Ireland, you can move to Dubai if you want. And those are much more tax-friendly places depending on how you structure yourself. To where if that's your goal, you can put together a holistic plan, the kind that we do here at Nomad Capitalist, to say, okay, I'm an American. I've already got one hand tied behind my back in terms of I've still got to comply with the IRS, and we, of course, can encourage you to do that. But there's still ways to get the taxes on your business down into the single digits. And if you are an entrepreneur and you value being an entrepreneur or an investor more than you value being someone who follows politics, then you should realize as an entrepreneur, it's thoroughly within your power to control your destiny. That's what entrepreneurship is about, is not waiting for someone else to come in and take charge. And yet, how many people who are entrepreneurs and investors who are supposed to be taking charge delegate some of the most important things, their finances, their freedom, and even their lifestyle? More people than ever saying, I don't recognize my country when they come and tell us that. And so you're delegating things while saying that you're take charge. If Republicans win, you might have a brief reprieve. It may end up blowing up in people's face if something bad happens on their watch. But you may have a brief reprieve to lower your taxes a teensy-weensy bit or open up some kind of social policy that you want. Is that really the way that you want to run your life? Or would you rather just say, all right, here's what I'm looking for. Let me go to the place that offers it. I'm sure I can adapt because guess what? There's dozens of countries around the world where they speak English. There's dozens of countries that are extremely tax-friendly, including to Americans. And so my message is if you're, got your fingers crossed for some kind of red wave in this midterm election, that you'd be much better off figuring out how you can take back the control rather than waiting for politicians to do it.